This is Mac OS Ken.
Gauging analyst reaction to Apple earnings, the setting and rising iPhone lines, and did Tim Cook spill some AI beans? It is Wednesday, the 9th of August, 2023. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and sponsored by BetterHelp. Online therapy. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/macosken. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macosken. We'll play a bit more catch-up today in the wake of Apple's third quarter fiscal year 2023 earnings report. I had said yesterday that reactions had been ugly, with shares in the Cupertino company dropping from about $191 before earnings hit to just under $179 on Monday. I should have been clearer, though. While shareholders were hitting sell, a lot of analysts leaned harder into their positive ratings on Apple stock. Apple 3.0 ran excerpts of analyst reactions late last week. Only one note was decidedly negative, and even that could have been worse. Rosenblatt analyst Barton Crockett basically sees nothing to turn Apple's shares around until a material new product category takes hold. Assuming he's talking about Apple Vision Pro, that could take time for a couple of reasons. First, the thing's not due out until early next year, and second, it's going to cost an arm and a leg to put that on your head. The material new product category taking hold is uncertain in Crockett's estimation, both in timing and success, leaving little reason to favor shares. He used last week's note to downgrade Apple from buy to neutral. He left his price target where it was, though, $198. Lots of other Apple analysts were unfazed, even buoyed. Morgan Stanley's Eric Woodring was impressed with Apple's September quarter guide, Mac and iPad not included. Apple execs indicated that strength for those products a year ago sets up such a tough compare that Apple is likely to report declining revenue again this quarter. Otherwise, the analyst wrote, the September quarter guide was solid, as Apple continues to see strength in the right places, with iPhone and services accelerating in September and gross margin guidance implying a new quarterly record. Woodring has an overweight rating on Apple shares. He used last week's note to raise his price target on the shares from $210 to $215. Raymond James analyst Srini Pajuri just recapped what Apple had reported. He seemed impressed with performance for products and services despite the mixed macro and FX headwinds. He's got an outperform rating on Apple shares. Pajuri used last week's note to raise his price target on the shares from $180 to $200. The dauntless Daniel Ives of Wedbush. The star of the show was services revenue, up 8% year-on-year, which was above street expectations and set to accelerate to double-digit growth in the September quarter and fiscal year 24 on the shoulders of App Store strength, as this remains key to Apple's overall re-rating and growth story. He's got an outperform rating on Apple shares. Ives used last week's note to raise his price target on the shares from $220 to $230. Oppenheimer analyst Martin Yang sees stagnating growth for Apple near term, but sees no cause for concern over the long-term thesis. Overall, wrote the analyst, Apple's above-peer performance under the challenging macro backdrop validates its solid competitive strength and customer loyalty. He's got an outperform rating on Apple shares. Yang used last week's note to raise his price target on the shares from $195 to $220. A couple of other notable moves with no notes attached that I could find. A post on investing.com says Canaccord upped its price target on Apple shares from $185 to $205. With a move like that, No surprise, it also kept its buy rating on the stock. And finally, Jefferies analyst Andrew Yerkowitz also maintained his buy rating on the Cupertino Company shares. He did lower his target, though, dropping it from $225 to $220. Funny story. Investors seemed to decide Tuesday that Apple had had enough, at least for one day anyway. Shares broke their roughly 1 week losing streak, closing up just under $1. They start trading today at $179.80. While smartphone upgrades may be down, Apple is still making the most money off them. Counterpoint Research issued numbers late last week, arguing that last quarter was a record quarter for Apple in terms of smartphone revenue and operating profit share. According to the firm, Apple claimed 45% of global smartphone revenue and 85% of operating profit. That was up from 84% of global profit the quarter before and 81% the quarter before that. Coloring inside the Apple line, Counterpoint Research Director Jeff Fieldhack said, Apple shipments declined by 3% year-on-year, while the smartphone market declined by 9% in the same period. At the same time, its average selling price increased thanks to a growing contribution of the Pro series, declining contribution of the SE series, and the replacement of the Mini in iPhone 13 with a Plus in iPhone 14. As a result, while Apple's iPhone revenue declined by 2% annually, its revenue share grew, reaching a second quarter record of 45%. And remember Apple's talk on last week's call about the record number of Android to iPhone switchers welcomed in the June quarter? Embarrassingly for Samsung, a lot of those switchers were in South Korea. A separate report from Counterpoint says about 85% of South Korean smartphone users aged less than 30 had an Android phone as their first smartphone, but 53% of them now use iPhones. That river does not run both ways. Of folks under 30 in South Korea who started on iPhone, 92% of them are still iPhone users. For Android turned iPhone users, the 53% who made the switch say they started with Android either because they took the advice of their elders or their elders were buying the phones for them. As for the reason for switching, the report says respondents cited performance, 32%, and brand image, 31%, as the first and second priorities. In particular, in terms of performance, satisfaction and expectation with the camera had the greatest impact on the purchasing decision. More news in a moment, but first a word from today's sponsor, BetterHelp. Online therapy. Life is a highway, says the song. You can go fast, but do you have any idea which direction you're headed in? Whether you're taking your life in a new direction or keeping on the road you're on, having a map and somebody to ride beside you can help. That's BetterHelp, and your BetterHelp therapist. BetterHelp takes away the tough parts of finding and going to a therapist. Since the whole thing happens online, you're not actually going and finding. You fill out a brief questionnaire, and BetterHelp works to find a licensed therapist who's right for you. And if the match isn't great, you can switch therapists anytime at no additional charge. And that happened to me once. Switching was really easy, and I ended up with a much better match for me. Life is a highway. Where do you want it to take you? Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/MacOSKen today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MacOSKen. BetterHelp.com/MacOSKen. Rumors today of when Apple's next best iPhone it's ever made ever will be released. iDownload blog has Bloomberg's Mark Gurman putting his chips on a couple of numbers. According to the report, the young scribe is looking for Apple to announce the iPhone 15 line on either Tuesday, the 12th of September, or Wednesday, the 13th. That would likely see orders begin on Friday, the 15th of September, with delivery and in-store availability the following Friday, the 22nd. The march toward iPhone 15's starter OS continues. A few pieces from Mac Rumors say Apple on Tuesday let loose the 5th developer betas of iOS and iPadOS 17, macOS Sonoma 14, watchOS 10, tvOS 17, and a 5th developer beta of the Studio Display 17 firmware. World peace? Just around the corner. Or the next one. It's probably around one of these corners. Apple Pay is tackling 2 new regions starting this week. The piece from 9 to 5 Mac says Apple's contactless payment solution has gone live in Vietnam, while another from Apple Insider says the same for Chile. On the former, the 9 to 5 Mac piece has sightings in ascendance. They go from a code monkey spotting support on the back end to Vietnam's TP Bank announcing the news on its website to an announcement from Vietnam's Ministry of Industry and Trade. A pre-announcement, maybe? According to the report, that minister said last month, Apple Pay has made its debut in Vietnam, providing a new and convenient payment option for Apple users in the country. With the introduction of Apple Pay in Vietnam, it is expected to further boost the adoption of cashless payment methods in the country. Probably even more now that it's actually happened. As for Chile, the Apple Insider piece says the country's BCI Bank has now unveiled its own support page for customers wishing to use Apple Pay, which it describes, in translation, as the easy, safe, and private way to pay. A bit unusually, the bank's support site hit after Apple listed locations in the country supporting the service. I'm starting to think Apple has a thing for emerging markets. The arrivals in Vietnam and Chile follow a number of smaller market launches earlier this year. Those include Apple Pay support hitting Guatemala, El Salvador, Panama, and Honduras. And finally today, Tim Cook said 2 very interesting things on last week's earnings call. Well, more than 2, but we'll focus on 2. The first was just an interesting mention of Apple Vision Pro. Apple CEO says he now uses it daily. It would have been nice if he had said how, but still, interesting. Thing 2. Asked about Apple and its plans for artificial intelligence, Cook said the kind of thing he normally says, that AI and machine learning are baked into everything Apple does, that the 2 tech terms are prominent in such Apple offerings as personal voice, live voicemail, fall detection, and crash detection. It is the kind of thing he has said before, though he might have added a bit of a tell last week. Cook ended his answer with the statement, "As you know, we tend to announce things as they come to market, and that's our MO, and I'd like to stick to that." How many times has Apple been asked about AI only to have Tim Cook answer, "It's in the stuff we're already making, full stop"? Last week's answer was, "It's in the stuff we're already making," followed by, "We don't announce new stuff until we announce new stuff." I wouldn't say I feel titillated, but I do feel teased. Do that to me one more time. Apple planning to test AI services using Foxconn servers. So read the headline from Mac Rumors. According to the report, Foxconn will exclusively supply Apple with dedicated servers for training and testing artificial intelligence services, according to Taiwan's Economic Daily News. Might that be a thing consumers see this fall? Well, it's kind of funny. I know Tim Cook said they don't announce stuff until they announce it. And while that is true, what does it mean exactly? Apple showed off its new ideas for CarPlay at WWDC 22. Those have yet to hit the road in any kind of big way. Of course, Apple needs car makers to come along, but still, it announced that thing long before that thing was ready. Could Apple announce a consumer-facing AI something or other with this fall's iPhone 15 launch, similar to the way they did with the inclusion of Siri in iPhone 4S? Maybe this fall could see the announcement of the Apple GPT thing on which rumors last month said Apple was working. Assuming Apple is working on such a thing, it's going to have to come out in beta, right? Like all the other generative AI things that have been hitting over the past year? His answer was not as pat as it normally is. And that's got me thinking. It's also got me somewhere between titillated and teased. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and sponsored by BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/macOSKen. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media. Online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.